Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 episode number 118 based on novel. So let's start. Wang Donga could clearly see a silver wave rippling out explosively. She was still staying close to the protective barrier behind the fortress, so she was immediately repelled by an immense force. A look of astonishment flashed across her pretty face as she extended her wings to compensate for the enormous pushing power. Hua Yuhao frowned below the stage as he muttered to himself, a shock bomb. Is he not afraid of the force shattering his own heart? Shock bombs were a special type of soul tool. Shock bombs were meant for offensive use, and they could produce powerful shockwaves to strike at opponents within a certain range. What Zhu Xinghao did was use a shock bomb to attack both himself and Wang Donga at the same time impartially, so that he could push Wang Donga away from him. He intended to hurt Wang Donga more, but he also hurt himself in the process. No, his invincible barrier hasn't completely vanished yet. Hua Yuhao immediately recovered after his momentary surprise. Zhu Xinghao used his own invincible barrier to withstand the shock bomb's effects, and even though he had to consume soul power in the process, this was better than the shock bomb taking effect on his own body. Furthermore, he finally took the opportunity to spin around. The several hundred cannon barrels on and around him flared blindingly the moment Wang Donga appeared in his field of view. At this point, he was no longer just a porcupine. He had turned into a terrifying metal blender. All kinds of soul rays and soul cannon shells, explosive shells, incendiary shells, paralysis rays, freezing rays, shock bombs, decomposition shells, rupturing bombs, and various other frightening attacks covered an area of 20 meters around Wang Donga. This metal hurricane that erupted so suddenly seemed to symbolize Zhu Xinghao's emotions. His expression looked savage and ferocious, and his eyes were bloodshot with rage and fury. His eyes were as wide as they could be, and he wanted to watch his metal hurricane tear Wang Donga's body to pieces. They were so close together, and defense wasn't Wang Donga's forte, either. This was everything that he had, and it would be extremely difficult for her to escape if she found herself locked in by this all-out assault. Meng Hongchen covered her mouth beneath the competition stage. Several people from the Tang sect camp stood up with nervous looks on their faces. Hua Yuhao had just used his necromancer's silent heart, so his face was still as cold as before. His brain was still calculating at top speed. Right in the moment that her opponent erupted, Wang Donga still felt goosebumps all over her body even though she was prepared. He lived up to the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's name after all, and their soul tools were very formidable. However, right when that metal hurricane was about to rip her to pieces, she vanished into thin air. Yes, she disappeared without any warning at all. Clang! A powerful force appeared behind his back, and a sharp aura of light forced its way into the soul fort and poured inside. The entire cannon base began to shake with this attack. How can it be? How can this be instant shift? At this moment, Zhu Xinghao was facing his team's waiting area, staring at Xiao Hongchen with a doubtful look in his eyes. They didn't have to talk about Wang Donga's fifth soul skill, the one that she used to defeat Shixing. The instant shift that she had just used was clearly not something that she released with her soul rings. How could she possess a skill like that? Xiao Hongchen's eyes froze as well. Who would have thought that Wang Donga had a trump card like that in a time as crucial as this? Wang Donga's dazzling bluish-golden wings slashed ferociously at his soul tool fortress. Zhu Xinghao no longer had his invincible barrier, and no matter how tough the fort's metal was, it couldn't be compared to a Soul Emperor's attack. Two deep gashes appeared behind the soul tool fort. Zhu Xinghao spun around hysterically, but Wang Donga kept herself close to him and used the ghost shadow perplexing track as she followed his rotation. Her wings resembled two heavy blades as they lashed out again and again. Metal fragments broke apart and flowed out continuously, and soul tool after mighty soul tool was rapidly being damaged. Zhu Xinghao wanted to use his remaining invincible barrier along with another shock bomb to find yet another opportunity. However, Wang Donga's use of her instant shift made sure that he couldn't even muster any self-confidence at all. What difference will it make if I pull the same trick again? She can just use instant shift to evade everything. Zhu Xinghao understood that the key to his defeat was allowing Wang Donga to come near him. Her instant shift also had a range limit, and his soul tool fortress wasn't suited for an opponent like her at all. Enough! At this moment, a loud shout tore through the air, and a layer of silver light pushed Wang Donga away. The judge stood in front of Zhu Xinghao like a hen that was trying to protect her chicks. What are you doing? Wang Donga exclaimed angrily with a cold look in her eyes. She was already preparing for a killing blow. The soul tool fortress was already cracked and breaking apart, and Zhu Xinghao was about to perish at her hands at any moment. The judge lowered his voice and said, "He doesn't have the ability to fight back anymore. I'm the judge, and I rule that the Tang sect is victorious in this round. I have the authority to stop the competition if one party is no longer able to fight back." Wang Donga gradually calmed down. She grunted dispassionately as she gripped her milk bottle and walked back to the center of the arena. "I haven't lost yet. Go to hell." Zhu Xinghao roared hysterically, and he arched his body backwards and revealed 8 shining silver cannon mouths on his chest. 8 silver rays immediately fired off toward Wang Donga with lightning speed in the next moment. Wang Donga had her back to him, and she had not expected that Zhu Xinghao would launch another attack against her when the judge had already ruled this round as her win. Furthermore, the judge did nothing to stop him. The truth was that this wasn't because the judge was biased towards Zhu Xinghao, he also didn't expect Zhu Xinghao to continue attacking after his ruling. However, he did feel an intense excitement and delight when those 8 silver rays flew toward Wang Donga. Watch out! Hua Yuhao's icy voice suddenly rang out in Wang Donga's mind. Wang Donga always trusted Hua Yuhao's words. Furthermore, she could also hear Zhu Xinghao's hysterical voice behind her. She lunged forward towards the ground, and her 5th soul ring lit up once more as intense golden light immediately covered her entire body. Pop, pop, pop. Even though Wang Donga's evasion was quick, the soul rays were traveling at breakneck speed, and 3 rays still hit her back. Wang Donga grunted from the pain as she stumbled a few steps forward from the force. Even though she had the Goddess of Light's possession, 3 holes still appeared on her back, and she felt as if there was some terrifying force that was rapidly causing her body to break apart. If she hadn't used her Goddess of Light's possession in time to defend herself, the rays would have tunneled right through her body. Bastard! Several people from the Tang sect leapt onto the competition stage in an instant. However, their movements couldn't compare to how quick another beam of light was. That light had a radiant golden color, and was tinged with deep purple hues. This beam seemed material, as if it could pierce through even time and space. The competition stage's protective dome had receded the moment the judge declared that Wang Donga was victorious in this round, so there was nothing blocking this beam. Right when Wang Donga was lunging forward to lie flat on the ground, the purplish golden light that seemed to tunnel through reality and eternity arrived before Zhu Xinghao. Zhu Xinghao howled and released his invincible barrier once more. He was excited at this moment. The silver rays that he had just used were forceful decomposition rays, and they possessed a special characteristic of breaking apart all kinds of matter. These rays were considered one of the most destructive soul rays. He could imagine Wang Donga's body breaking apart, and drawing her last breath from the decomposition. The moment he saw that purplish golden light appear, he felt as if his spirit was leaving his body, and he used his second invincible barrier that he carried around without any hesitation. He deeply believed that whatever his opponent unleashed couldn't do anything to him with his invincible barrier around him, no matter what it was. However, a sinister scene appeared on the competition stage the moment that purplish golden light struck Zhu Xinghao's invincible barrier. The people from the Tang sect, along with the Sun Moon Empire's team who were also rushing onto stage, and everything else that was moving seemed to freeze in that moment, as if time itself seemed to freeze. A ray of golden light descended from the sky in the next moment and slammed brutally into Zhu Xinghao's invincible barrier. That golden ray disregarded his invincible barrier entirely, and it pierced right through it the moment it struck and landed directly onto Zhu Xinghao's body. A golden light projection that resembled a skeleton immediately flickered above Zhu Xinghao's body, and his entire body seemed to freeze and go slack. The purplish golden beam drilled right through him, and Zhu Xinghao's invincible barrier broke apart in an instant. Boom! Zhu Xinghao's body was still inside his broken and tattered soul tool fortress, and he resembled a bursting balloon as his entire frame exploded violently, starting from his head. Flesh and blood flew in all directions in that moment, and his damaged protective soul barrier was also blown into smithereens. Zhu Xinghao transformed into a tornado of flesh and metal that whirled all over the place. Time returned to normal, and the scene that everyone saw was this horrifying sight. Astonished gasps resonated through the entire place. Jing Hongchen's face was black as he stood up on the rostrum, and the petrifying atmosphere that resulted from the explosion that had occurred on stage caused even the Sun Moon Empire's team to pause as they dashed onto the stage. Even Xiao Hongchen's footsteps halted momentarily. Xiao Hongchen's eyes immediately found a person that was sitting down on the other side. That person was Hua Yuhao, who was still sitting in his wheelchair in the waiting area, and hadn't climbed onto the competition stage. A purplish golden vertical eye that didn't seem like it had any life at all was gradually closing up on his forehead. Xiao Hongchen felt a little dizzy even though this vertical eye was in the process of closing up. 100 meters. This attack was launched from 100 meters away, and Zhu Xinghao also had his invincible barrier to protect him. Despite all that, this strike broke through his invincible barrier. What kind of power was required to achieve something like that? The Sun Moon Empire team was about to go crazy after their temporary astonishment. All kinds of soul tools were unleashed one after another in that instant as soul rings sparkled alternately. A chaotic brawl was about to occur. The Tang sect team also began to move. Xu Sanqi's face was dark and solemn as he stood at the very front, protecting Wang Donga behind him. He Kaitu was right next to him, and he unleashed an enormous soul tool fortress just like that from nothing at all. His Juga Divine crossbow cannon's 16 cannon mouths condensed light, and one large cannon shell after another protruded from the cannon barrels as a terrifying aura permeated the skies. These cannons felt as if they could go off at any moment. The 15 minutes of rest were soon over, and Wang Donga didn't continue on with the battles. The Sun Moon Empire's next participant that stepped onto the competition stage was a little shocked. Zheng Zhon had been standing at the stage center since the moment he arrived. He looked at He Kaitu and said, "If you switch, it means that Wang Dong has admitted defeat." "Yes." He Kai-tu walked up to the center of the stage and stared at Zheng Zhan as he nodded in acknowledgement. Xiao Hongchen almost went insane beneath the competition stage. The person that he had just sent up was meant to counter Wang Dong's fighting style, but the Tang sect switched someone else up. From his perspective, the Tang sect wanted to conserve strength so that Wang Dong could come back in the group battle. Nobody from his side knew much about Wang Dong's wounds, but the fact that she was still sitting beside Hua Yuhao meant that her wounds couldn't be that severe. Cunning. That's just too cunning. Hua Yuhao's arrangement was intended to break up his opponent's rhythm and momentum anyway, and it wasn't just because he was upset about Wang Dong's carelessness before her adversary. Zheng Zhan lowered his voice and said, "Report your names." He Kai-tu, Tang Sect. Xiaoping, Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. Zheng Zhan continued, "Return to your places, and prepare for the fight. Both of you must listen to my orders during the contest, and I have the authority to punish you accordingly if either one of you decides to continue attacking after I announce this round's ruling." Nobody dared to disregard and underestimate a Class 9 Soul Engineer's threats. He Kai-tu and Xiaoping nodded before they returned to their respective sides. This was the single elimination round's third match. More accurately put, this was the fourth match, because Wang Dong gave one up. The current score was 2 versus 1 in favor of the Tang sect. Furthermore, the Tang sect had ensured their entry into the group battle because of the 2 points that they had secured. He Kai-tu turned around and stared into the distance as he reached the edge of the competition stage. He took a step forward with his left leg, and he took a stance as if he were going to charge forward. Xiaoping's eyes were as sharp and focused as ever on the other side. He was like a cheetah that was winding up. Zheng Zhan looked at both parties as he raised his right arm high into the air before he swung it down to signal that the match had begun. Xiaoping's soul thrusters behind his back glowed the moment Zheng Zhan swung his hand down, and he blasted towards He Kai-tu just like Wang Dong got close to Zhu Xinghao. Yes, he was a close combat soul engineer, and Xiao Hongchen had initially meant for him to meet Wang Dong head-on. A long spear appeared in Xiaoping's hands as he dashed forward. There were 2 sharp points on his spear, and they began to shine with intense light as he moved forward. 3 soul rings lit up one after another, greatly boosting his soul power. He Kai-tu was in a sprinting stance, and he also began to move when his opponent did. Of course, he wouldn't use his soul tool fortress and end up at a disadvantage like Zhu Xinghao did. He Kai-tu raised his right hand, and a soul cannon immediately appeared on his right arm. A silver sphere was fired and exploded less than 20 meters out, transforming into a silver web that enveloped Xiaoping flying toward him. Xiaoping's eyes were overflowing with the desire to draw blood, but he still managed to retain his composure amidst all the bloodlust. A white light erupted from his chest, and his forward-moving body abruptly came to a halt as flourishing soul power undulations rippled from his body. He propelled himself backwards right as armor covered his entire body with a clang. This tiny forward and backward movement couldn't be disregarded. Xiaoping had forced himself backwards when he was charging forward at lightning speed. The reactive impact wasn't something that normal people could withstand. Yet, it was this reverse propulsion force that gave him a chance to avoid that enormous silver web from trapping him at the last moment. The light web closed up, and Xiaoping was about to charge forward once more when a violent and shocking explosion erupted. Silver-white shockwaves detonated from where the light web had closed, and forced Xiaoping to pause as he was getting ready to renew his charge. Xiaoping's body unwillingly stopped for an instant. The 15 minutes of rest were soon over, and Wang Dong didn't continue on with the battles. The Sun Moon Empire's next participant that stepped onto the competition stage was a little shocked. Zheng Zhan had been standing at the stage center since the moment he arrived. He looked at He Kai-tu and said, "If you switch, it means that Wang Dong has admitted defeat." "Yes." He Kai-tu walked up to the center of the stage and stared at Zheng Zhan as he nodded in acknowledgement. Xiao Hongchen almost went insane beneath the competition stage. The person that he had just sent up was meant to counter Wang Dong's fighting style, but the Tang sect switched someone else up. From his perspective, the Tang sect wanted to conserve strength so that Wang Dong could come back in the group battle. Nobody from his side knew much about Wang Dong's wounds, but the fact that she was still sitting beside Hua Yuhao meant that her wounds couldn't be that severe. Cunning. That's just too cunning. Hua Yuhao's arrangement was intended to break up his opponent's rhythm and momentum anyway, and it wasn't just because he was upset about Wang Dong's carelessness before her adversary. Zheng Zhan lowered his voice and said, "Report your names." He Kai-tu, Tang Sect. Xiaoping, Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. Zheng Zhan continued, "Return to your places, and prepare for the fight. Both of you must listen to my orders during the contest, and I have the authority to punish you accordingly if either one of you decides to continue attacking after I announce this round's ruling." Nobody dared to disregard and underestimate a Class 9 Soul Engineer's threats. He Kai-tu and Xiaoping nodded before they returned to their respective sides. This was the single elimination round's third match. More accurately put, this was the fourth match, because Wang Dong gave one up. The current score was 2 versus 1 in favor of the Tang sect. Furthermore, the Tang sect had ensured their entry into the group battle because of the 2 points that they had secured. He Kai-tu turned around and stared into the distance as he reached the edge of the competition stage. He took a step forward with his left leg, and he took a stance as if he were going to charge forward. Xiaoping's eyes were as sharp and focused as ever on the other side. He was like a cheetah that was winding up. Zheng Zhon looked at both parties as he raised his right arm high into the air before he swung it down to signal that the match had begun. Xiao Ping's soul thrusters behind his back glowed the moment Zheng Zhon swung his hand down, and he blasted towards He Kai-tu just like Wang Dong got close to Zhu Xinghao. Yes, he was a close combat soul engineer, and Xiao Hongchen had initially meant for him to meet Wang Dong head-on. A long spear appeared in Xiao Ping's hands as he dashed forward. There were 2 sharp points on his spear, and they began to shine with intense light as he moved forward. 3 soul rings lit up one after another, greatly boosting his soul power. He Kai-tu was in a sprinting stance, and he also began to move when his opponent did. Of course, he wouldn't use his soul tool fortress and end up at a disadvantage like Zhu Xinghao did. He Kai-tu raised his right hand, and a soul cannon immediately appeared on his right arm. A silver sphere was fired and exploded less than 20 meters out, transforming into a silver web that enveloped Xiao Ping flying toward him. Xiao Ping's eyes were overflowing with the desire to draw blood, but he still managed to retain his composure amidst all the bloodlust. A white light erupted from his chest, and his forward-moving body abruptly came to a halt as flourishing soul power undulations rippled from his body. He propelled himself backwards right as armor covered his entire body with a clang. This tiny forward and backward movement couldn't be disregarded. Xiao Ping had forced himself backwards when he was charging forward at lightning speed. The reactive impact wasn't something that normal people could withstand. Yet, it was this reverse propulsion force that gave him a chance to avoid that enormous silver web from trapping him at the last moment. The light web closed up, and Xiao Ping was about to charge forward once more when a violent and shocking explosion erupted. Silver-white shockwaves detonated from where the light web had closed, and forced Xiao Ping to pause as he was getting ready to renew his charge. Xiao Ping's body unwillingly stopped for an instant. Xiao Xiao, Jiang Nannan, and Nana were standing beside them, and they released their martial souls at the same time. Stop! A deafening exclamation rang out, and a human figure descended from the sky in the next moment. This person was an elderly man clad in a long green robe, and he landed right next to the judge. This person raised his hand, and a green light screen rose several hundred meters into the sky. This light screen forcibly separated the 2 opposing parties, and even the pressure that they released was separated. Everyone from the Tang sect camp grew stern, and this was especially true for He Kai-tu. He was a soul engineer, and he naturally knew what ability the old man before him had just used. That was probably a Class 9 soul tool, and even a titled Doluor would have trouble breaking through a defensive barrier of that level. The old man turned around and knocked the judge off stage with one slap, and the judge was dashed to the ground beneath the stage just like that. Stop, everyone. Calm yourselves. My name is Zheng Zhon, and I'm this tournament's chief judge. Whoever dares to make another move will be immediately disqualified from the tournament. The corner of Xiao Hongchen's mouth twitched. He naturally recognized Zheng Zhon. He was a powerful Class 9 soul engineer, but this man didn't have a good relationship with his grandfather, and was instead an important figure from the Empire's Hall of Consecration. This man was as close as one could be to Xiao Hongchen's grandfather in terms of cultivation, even if he didn't actually have the same rank, and he was especially adept with defensive soul tools. Zheng Zhon was known as the Unbreakable King, and his title was Unbreakable, the Unbreakable Doluor, Zheng Zhon. Xiao Hongchen raised his hand, and the Sun Moon Empire team reluctantly and grudgingly withdrew their respective soul tools. Their eyes looked like they were spitting fire. The Tang sect camp didn't do much, as Jiang Nannan helped Wang Donga up and whispered, "How are you feeling, Donga?" Wang Donga forced a smile and said, "I'm alright, it's just a little painful." It would be strange if she didn't feel any pain after being struck by those decomposition rays, and 3 black spots could be seen on her back. If she didn't have her Goddess of Light's possession that greatly weakened the force of those Class 6 decomposition rays, she would probably have been heinously injured by now. Even so, she had still consumed more than 30% of her soul power before she managed to stabilize her wounds, making sure her bones, ligaments, and her organs weren't damaged. However, she was a top-tier beauty, and skin damage would infuriate her even more than if her bones and her organs were damaged. "We need an explanation, Chief Judge Zhong." A cold voice rang out from behind the Tang sect's people. Ji Juechen was pushing Huo Yuhao's wheelchair, and Jing Xian and Nan Qiuqiu stood guard beside them as they walked onto the competition stage. The Tang sect company parted to create a path, so that Huo Yuhao could come all the way out in front. His eyes were so cold at this point that they seemed like they could freeze through everything. Huo Yuhao stared quietly at Zheng Zhon, who was a titled Doluor and also a Class 9 soul engineer, and his aura seemed to match even Zheng Zhon's. Zheng Zhon said in a deep voice, "I've seen everything that just happened. This happened because of the judge, and I will immediately relieve him of his duty. I will personally oversee this round until the end." "That's not what I'm talking about." Huo Yuhao shook his head. Zheng Zhon focused his eyes. It had been many years since someone dared to speak to him like that. Strangely, he wasn't angry at all as he lowered his voice and said, "Zhu Xinghao attacked Wang Dong after the outcome of this round has been ruled, and he brought his own death upon himself. However, he has already paid for it with his life. This issue is considered resolved. As the chief judge, I will give Wang Dong 15 minutes to rest before the competition will continue." Huo Yuhao stared at Zheng Zhon deeply before his eyes turned towards Xiao Hongchen in the distance, but he said nothing. However, his gaze was like a sharp knife. Zheng Zhon thought about the incomprehensible and unfathomable purplish gold beam that just appeared, and even he felt a little numb from Huo Yuhao's piercing stare. "Let's go back." Huo Yuhao spoke plainly, and he didn't push the issue any further. They were inside the Sun Moon Empire, and he wouldn't have gotten a better explanation or ruling even if this competition wasn't in the Sun Moon Empire. Everything could only be resolved on stage. Ji Juechen continued pushing Huo Yuhao's wheelchair as they returned to their waiting area. Huo Yuhao glanced at Wang Dong'er quietly as he passed by, and he reached out and grasped her hand. However, his expression was still as cold as before. Wang Dong'er glanced back at him discreetly. She thought to herself, thankfully, he used that ability that allows him to keep calm and composed. Otherwise, she couldn't even imagine what would have happened. Inside the resting lounge, Wang Chua's eyes sparkled as she silently stared at Huo Yuhao. Her eyes seemed to glow with something, and her right hand unwittingly gripped her chair's armrest. Only she could feel that the beam that was fired from Huo Yuhao's Eye of Destiny carried a certain crazy sense of exhaustion, and even she felt a little dazed at that moment. She didn't know if she could take an attack like that had she been the target. If Huo Yuhao was a dragon, then Wang Dong'er was his reverse scale. Wang Dong'er immediately retrieved her milk bottle to replenish her soul power when she returned to the waiting area. Huo Yuhao grasped her hand tighter, and Haodong power immediately began to circulate through the most important parts of Wang Dong'er's body. Huo Yuhao lowered his voice and said, "The next battle is up to you now, second senior brother." Wang Dong'er opened her eyes forcefully. I can keep going." Huo Yuhao shot a cold look at her and said, "Shut up. You were careless before your adversary, and you weren't on guard against an enemy that still had the ability to fight. Won't you be sending yourself to your own death if you go again? I've said this before, there can only be one voice in this team. I'm the leader, and you must listen to my orders." Wang Dong'er pouted, and tears started welling up in her eyes. Huo Yuhao had never spoken to her with that tone and attitude. That was just so annoying. He Kaitu chortled and said, "Don't worry, Dong'er. Let your second senior brother handle this. I will make their heads pop one after another." Wang Dong'er nodded softly. Even though she was a little displeased with Huo Yuhao's attitude, he was still her man after all, and this wasn't the time for her to throw a tantrum. That would undoubtedly affect the influence and command that her boyfriend had as team leader. Zheng Zhon's eyes lit up, and he tilted his head as he muttered under his breath, "This fellow from the Tang sect is not bad indeed. His combined alluring net and a shock bomb. This can control, repel, and carries offensive effects all at the same time. This is a very innovative soul tool indeed, and it is meant to buy him enough time for something. If his opponent's reaction is too slow, this soul tool can directly take them down." He Kaitu immediately made his move at the same time that he fired his luring net and shock bomb. He moved in the standard way that soul engineers typically did, and he followed the stage's edge and rapidly shifted along as he lifted a heavy cannon on his shoulder. Large amounts of rupturing shells burst out and blasted towards his opponent, and he activated the flying-type soul tool on his back at the same time, soaring into the sky as he fired off his rupturing shells. The shock bomb repelled Xiaoping, and he displayed his own strengths as a wave of rupturing bombs followed immediately after. Soul thrusters shone on his palms, feet, thighs, and behind his back as soul thrusters of many different sizes complemented the flying-type soul tool on his back and brought his body diagonally into the sky. Xiaoping surged into the air with incredible speed, and raced towards He Kaitu as he evaded those rupturing shells. He pointed the spear in his hands forward, and blinding white light erupted from the spear's edged tip right towards He Kaitu. He Kaitu had been observing his opponent this entire time. The soul thrusters on Xiaoping's body were all hidden within and attached to that armor of his, which covered the most important parts of his body. Xiaoping wasn't wearing full-body armor, but a lighter and more flexible style. He displayed how advantageous this agility was as he soared through the air, and all those soul thrusters allowed him to make some movements that seemed to defy natural laws. He Kaitu shifted 3 feet horizontally while he was still in the air, and evaded the light beam just like that. The wings behind his back turned down and allowed him to hover in midair. He Kaitu switched out the weapon on his shoulder, and a strangely shaped cannon appeared. The back of this cannon was conical, but it was rectangular at the front when he placed it on his shoulder, and there were 18 cannon mouths split into 3 rows. Dense and intense bluish-purple light began to shine out from it. In the next moment, lightning that seemed to blanket the entire world poured towards Xiaoping. What soul tool is that? Even Zheng Zhon was taken aback. He had immersed himself in soul tools for almost 100 years, but even he couldn't recognize He Kaitu's soul tool with all the experience that he had. This meant that He Kaitu's soul tool was self-invented. Every lightning streak that this strange cannon fired was as thick as an arm. The most frightening part was that these lightning streaks detonated once they were fired, and each streak split into even more lightning streaks. 18 streaks transformed into a web of lightning bolts in an instant and barreled towards his opponent, who was still charging towards him. This web had a large surface area, and there was no way Xiaoping could dodge this no matter how agile and nimble he was. He Kaitu had an extremely calm look on his face, and there was some straightforwardness amid all that composure that had always been there. However, there was nothing straightforward about the soul tool in his hands. Xiaoping was equally astonished by this soul tool that he had never heard of nor seen before. He kept his spear pointed forwards, and his armor glowed all over as ray after ray of light condensed to form a white barrier that protected his body within. He Kaitu's pupils contracted. That was a Class 7 protective soul barrier. Xiaoping only had 5 soul rings, and it was evident that he wasn't strong enough to use something as powerful as a Class 7 protective soul barrier. The only possibility was that this soul tool had special characteristics that allowed him to operate it. This soul tool probably made use of resonance technology and merged many soul barriers at the same time, which allowed it to erupt with such formidable power. It was the only way Xiaoping could produce defensive capabilities that matched a Class 7 protective soul barrier, as Class 7 was the rank of a soulsei. Naturally, this was also because Xiaoping was a close combat soul engineer. If Xiaoping had been a traditional soul engineer like Hikaitu, he wouldn't use this resonance soul barrier even if he had it, as it would consume far too much soul power. Attaching something like this to himself meant it would be very difficult to use other soul tools, because resonance technology had to be in tandem with the soul power undulations at every spot on his body. There was no way to switch out to other soul tools. Xiaoping released his Class 7 soul barrier and immediately shot forward like an arrow. He didn't intend to avoid those lightning streaks anymore, charging straight for Hikaitu. Xiaoping's Class 7 soul barrier had impressive defensive capabilities. Indeed, the soul barrier repelled every single lightning streak, and Xiaoping didn't slow down at all. He was about to arrive before Hikaitu at any moment. Hikaitu could already see the murderousness and sinisterly evil expression in Xiaoping's eyes. Zheng Zhon had already risen into the air from ground, and he prepared himself to end this battle as soon as was needed. Boom! A vigorous explosion erupted between Hikaitu and Xiaoping. Xiaoping still had his Class 7 soul barrier up, but his entire body was sent hurtling through the air like a bullet. His Class 7 soul barrier broke apart from the impact, and if he hadn't unleashed his invincible barrier, the crackling lightning streaks in the sky would have torn him to pieces. Hikaitu was still hovering in midair, as if he hadn't moved at all. A cannon barrel with a mouth about the size of a bowl closed gradually near his chest, still flickering with light. Hikaitu switched out the soul cannon on his shoulder once more, and a golden red cannon that was about as thick as an arm and about 3 meters long appeared on his shoulder. The cannon's sight swung into place before his eyes, and he locked onto Xiaoping in the distance. There was a large burning cigar sticking out from the corner of his mouth, releasing wafts of green smoke. The cigar and the green smoke complemented his doughty look, and he appeared as valiant and fearsome as could be. Xiao Hongchen leapt off his chair in the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's camp once this long golden red cannon appeared. A Class 7 Stinger cannon. How can he have a Class 7 Stinger cannon? Stinger cannons were considered the most destructive single-target soul cannons. More accurately put, a Stinger cannon should be considered a soul ray, and it was only called a cannon because it was just too forceful. Not many soul engineers used Stinger cannons because they required manual aim and consumed a lot of soul power. However, Stinger cannons had a very long range, and were typically used to assault fortified positions. A Stinger cannon's greatest weakness was that it couldn't lock onto its target, and it couldn't track its target. However, its power was incredibly frightening. Xiaoping wouldn't be able to take a hit from this Stinger cannon even if he had his invincible barrier activated. The best solution against a Stinger cannon was to dodge its attack, exploiting the weakness that it couldn't lock onto a target. But Xiaoping was hurtling through the air after Hikaitu had tossed him away with some unknown method, slamming against the competition stage's protective barrier and bouncing back. Xiaoping's invincible barrier could protect him, but it couldn't help him absorb the impact. Could he react in time to dodge the Stinger cannon's attack? Nobody knew the answer to that question. Therefore, Zheng Zhon grew hesitant. He knew that stopping Hikaitu at this moment would mean that he was declaring Hikaitu victorious. However, Xiaoping would have another chance to get back in the game if he dodged this attack. Zheng Zhon no longer believed that Xiaoping had the fighting strength to defeat Hikaitu, who had already displayed a Class 7 soul engineer's prowess. However, the Sun Moon Empire's team was already down 2-1. How could he let them lose another point just like that? Hikaitu naturally didn't care what the judge was thinking about. He aimed, and he fired. It was that simple for him. More than half of the cigar in Hikaitu's mouth disappeared when he fired his Stinger cannon, as smoke and ash billowed in all directions. A golden red beam as thick as a finger cut across the air straight towards Xiaoping. This enormous pressure heralded mortal danger to Xiaoping. Even though he was still dizzy and concussed from the collision, goosebumps began to break out all over his body, and his hair stood on edge from the sudden pressure, allowing him to recover within the blink of an eye. Xiaoping didn't have time to look up to see what was happening, and neither did he have the time to make accurate judgments. He immediately activated his soul thrusters and attempted to fly out diagonally in an attempt to dodge this attack. However, he felt an intense numbness course over this body at this moment. Xiaoping looked down subconsciously, and saw a tiny needle protruding from his chest, a needle that shone with bluish-purple light. The overwhelming numbness was coming from this needle. Did he stick that into me before I opened my invincible barrier when my Class 7 soul barrier was blasted away? But that should be considered a stationary soul tool even though it's a needle. This was Xiaoping's final thought before he watched a golden red beam swallow that slender needle. The tiny needle was destroyed, and he himself could clearly feel that he had lost something as well. A hole no bigger than a thumb appeared in Xiaoping's invincible barrier and his heart at the same time. His eyes grew slack and were filled with incredulity. Not in his wildest dreams did he expect to die this way. A dash of cold light flickered across Hikaitu's eyes, but he quickly returned to his simple and honest look as he withdrew the cannon in his hands and gradually descended from the sky. Zheng Zhon caught Xiaoping as fast as he could when the latter dropped down from the sky. However, Zheng Zhon quickly discovered that Xiaoping couldn't be saved. His heart had been shot straight through. How could anybody save him? Xiao Ping's eyes were full of exasperation. There was nothing else he could say, and he puked out a whole lot of blood before he finally passed into the void. 2 combat deaths from 3 battles. The audience erupted into furor when Zheng Zhon announced Xiao Ping's death. They were inside the Sun Moon Empire, and not inside the Star Luo Empire like last season. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's team was representing the Sun Moon Empire in this competition, and 3 people had perished, one after another, in this round. How could the citizens not be upset? Huo Yuhao's eyes betrayed a faint look of surprise despite his ice-cold expression beneath the stage, and he glanced at He Kai-Tu on stage. He Kai-Tu turned around at this moment, and he nodded calmly at Huo Yuhao before he removed the cigar in his mouth and gave him a smile that seemed to contain a far deeper meaning. Huo Yuhao couldn't help but reminisce on the scene when He Kai-Tu had confided in him back then. Second senior brother, Zheng Zhon's expression was a little black. He was a Class 9 soul engineer, but he had failed to prevent another death in a match that he had personally refereed, so there was no way he didn't feel bad right now. However, he had been faced with a tough choice just now, and the outcome proved that he made the wrong one. Xiao Hongchen jumped onto the competition stage with a dark look on his face. I'm up for the next round. On the other side, Huo Yuhao also spoke up from the Tang sect's waiting area. The Tang sect will abandon the remaining single elimination rounds. We choose to enter the group battle directly. Both He Kai-Tu and Xiao Hongchen were taken aback for a moment, and Xiao Hongchen's expression grew even gloomier than before. He Kai-Tu frowned for a moment before he grabbed a milk bottle and leapt off the competition stage to show that he was absolutely supportive of Huo Yuhao's decision. The Tang sect had already won 3 matches. There were 7 matches of the single elimination round, and the Sun Moon Empire couldn't possibly overtake the Tang sect by more than 5 points even if they won the remaining matches. The final result had to be determined through the group battle. However, the Sun Moon Empire had already lost 2 in combat, and Huo Yuhao had slain another. 3 of the original 7 were dead. Substitutes weren't allowed in this 7-man round, and this meant that the Sun Moon Empire would be at a great disadvantage in the subsequent group battle. The Tang sect had an absolute advantage if they chose to go straight into the group battle, as they were 7 against 4. Zheng Zhon stared deeply into Huo Yuhao's eyes before he lowered his voice and declared, the single elimination round is over. Both parties can take some time to rest up, and we will commence the group battle after the break. The Tang sect has accumulated 3 points, and the Sun Moon Empire has 7. On the rostrum, Xu Tianran's face became darker and darker, and Jing Hongchen's eyebrows were also tightly knit together. The Tang sect's prowess was far stronger than he had imagined. The first 2 participants were both 6-ringed soul emperors, and He Kai-Tu had just displayed a Class 7 soul engineer's strength. It was correct to say that the 3 members from the Sun Moon Empire were completely suppressed by their opponents, rather than they didn't manage to unleash their full capabilities. The thing that worried and shocked Jing Hongchen the most was how powerful Huo Yuhao's eruption was. Jing Hongchen was a titled Doluo, and even he felt a little dizzy and lost the moment that purplish golden light appeared. He had found himself unable to lock onto and determine the peculiar attack that Huo Yuhao had unleashed. What kind of power was that? Even an invincible barrier couldn't stop it. Furthermore, the Tang sect was in the right during that incident. The group battle was about to commence. Even though the Sun Moon Empire's reserve team members weren't that much weaker than their main team members, there was a rift. Furthermore, his granddaughter and his grandson were also part of this tournament. It was absolutely impossible for Jing Hongchen not to be worried or anxious. Xu Tianran asked plainly, can they win the group battle? He placed a lot of emphasis on this year's tournament. Jing Hongchen took a deep breath and said, I have faith in those kids. However, I implore that you give me permission to keep those guys from the Tang sect here forever after the tournament. They will grow up to become real problems in the future if they possess such prowess at such a young age. Xu Tianran glanced at him and said, either you make them submit, or you make them disappear. Juzi was still sitting beside Xu Tianran, and her eyes shifted a little in response. He Kai-Tu sat down beside Huo Yuhao, but his expression was no different from before. Huo Yuhao stared at him and whispered, are you alright, second senior brother? He Kai-Tu shook his head and said, I'm good. I'm good. He raised his head as he spoke, and he gazed at the rostrum in the distance with a calm look in his eyes, there at the seat that was high above everyone else. The arena and the audience had settled down, and several Earth-type soul masters hurried around as they attempted to repair the competition stage. The group battle was about to start, and even though the competition stage was 100 meters in diameter and didn't look small at all, it couldn't be considered that spacious if it was to host 14 people at once. The least that the organizers could do was to repair the stage surface. Donga, you will remain by my side later, and you're responsible for protecting me, Huo Yuhao said plainly. Wang Donga was momentarily stunned. Her eyes darted around at the others, but she lowered her head in the end. She forced herself not to rebuff Huo Yuhao and ask if that was being unfair to the others. Huo Yuhao looked at his other compatriots. Please follow my guidance from my spiritual detection during the group battle after this. We have to win this round, and we can't afford to sustain any losses or injuries at all. Everyone nodded in agreement. Huo Yuhao closed his eyes once more, but his right hand was still holding onto Wang Donga's left hand. Everyone closed their eyes one after another, and they took this opportunity to mentally prepare themselves so that they could maintain their peak condition and go into battle in their best state. The subsequent round was a showdown of life and death to them, and a single misstep could lead to injury, and perhaps even death. Fortunately, that powerful soul engineer had taken over as judge, so this round would be a lot safer than otherwise. There were commotions all around the arena. The citizens and aristocratic families alike were all discussing things amongst themselves. Those who were more familiar with the competition rules originally expected that the tournament would be a little calmer after the initial elimination phase ended and the tournament progressed into the round robins. After all, the round robin stage didn't directly determine the final winner and loser. The point accumulation was related to whether the teams would get to progress into the next round, but one loss didn't mean that a team would be eliminated right away. Who would have thought that the round robin stage that they didn't expect to be too intense was so epic, and this was only the first round. Nobody had ever heard of the Tang sect before, and they were up against their own country's Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. The Tang sect ended up killing 3 of their own in a row. What exactly was going on? The audience's hearts were with the Sun Moon Empire's team, but the disgraceful attack against Wang Donga earlier made the audience cheer conspicuously quieter than before. That was such a low blow, and was simply too disgraceful. It was also the reason why most of the audience didn't feel bad or pity Zhu Xinghao after his head exploded from Huo Yuhao's formidable strike. Nobody expected that the Tang sect would have a landslide victory like that. Those who liked to gamble couldn't help but feel fortunate that their country prohibited gambling. Otherwise, they would probably have lost everything they had in this round. It was the truth. If the Tang sect eventually defeated the Sun Moon Empire's team, it would be the greatest upset since the start of this tournament. Everyone couldn't help but feel a thread of hope for the group battle that was about to commence. They naturally hoped that the Sun Moon Empire would emerge victorious, but the 3 consecutive losses before this shook their confidence and their faith. The Tang sect's first 2 participants were actually 2 6-ringed Soul Emperors. For most citizens, Soul Emperors were already considered unassailable and highly respectable people that nobody could reach. The competition stage's flooring was swiftly repaired. There was no time to reinstall the metal boards, but at least that didn't affect the tournament. Step on stage, everyone, Zheng Zhon announced with a deep voice. Wang Donga was the first to stand up, walking behind Huo Yuhao as she slowly pushed his wheelchair forward. The others didn't overtake them and followed behind, more than enough to prove Huo Yuhao's status as team leader. On the other side, the Sun Moon Empire's 4 remaining members got to their feet and jumped on stage one after another. Xiao Hongchen was still wearing that solemn and insidious look, and he walked in front of everyone else as he glared at Huo Yuhao in the distance. Xiao Hongchen's fists were tightly clenched, as if he were about to swallow him up. This round was 7 against 4, and those that were truly familiar with the Tang sect's team members understood that the Tang sect practically had an absolute advantage over their opponents. Unless some special circumstances cropped up, it was almost impossible for the Sun Moon Empire to turn the tables. This was also the benefit of killing opponents in the single elimination matches, as it wasn't difficult to see how much pressure the team would have to sustain with 3 fewer people. Something utterly unexpected happened right at that moment. Xiao Hongchen suddenly raised his hand and said, "Judge, we're admitting defeat for the group battle." Zheng Zhon was momentarily stunned, and he asked again to be sure. "Are you saying that the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy is admitting defeat in the group battle, which also means that you guys have lost this whole round?" "Yes." Xiao Hongchen was gritting his teeth as he nodded heavily. Huo Yuhao's eyes sparkled as he sat in his wheelchair. His eyes closed into a squint as he stared back at Xiao Hongchen, and his right hand unwittingly gripped his wheelchair's armrest tightly. Zheng Zhon paused for a little while as he stared into Xiao Hongchen's eyes. He lowered his voice and said, "All right, the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy has admitted defeat in the group battle. The Tang sect is victorious in this round." Zheng Zhon was a 9-ringed titled Doluo, and his voice traveled to every corner of the arena so that every single person in the audience could hear. There was an immediate uproar. Back on the rostrum, Xu Tianran was also taken aback. Jing Hongchen thought that Xu Tianran was about to erupt in a fit of rage, but Xu Tianran's face broke into a smile. He knows when to bend and when to give or take. "Not bad, Hallmaster Hongchen. Your grandson has improved a lot over the years, and is not so headstrong and all about the fists anymore." Jing Hongchen lowered his head and forced a laugh. "He's humiliated the Empire, Your Majesty. Please punish him." Xu Tianran smiled and said, "The round-robin stage has only just begun, and this round is far from over. The final result hasn't been revealed, so nobody can say whether he's disgraced us or not. Furthermore, I'm sure he will learn from this lesson, and he won't repeat the same mistakes in the following rounds. However, the Tang sect is quite interesting, and they seem quite powerful. Imperial Tutor, what is the ability that Huo Yuhao used before this?" The Imperial Tutor was sitting on his other side, and he was clad from head to toe in black. He lowered his voice and said, "I believe it was a spiritual type attack. His martial soul is a pair of eyes, but that third eye should have come about from some mutation, and it's likely similar to the body sect's second martial soul awakening. This has allowed him to develop formidable spiritual power. That soul skill is incredibly powerful, and I'm afraid there's nobody at the same rank as him who can withstand that attack. It would require special soul tools or soul skills that are specifically designed to counter that soul skill if one wished to deal with it, and I believe the Hallmaster is quite adept at things like that. I believe that the Hallmaster's grandson opted to withdraw temporarily because he hasn't found a way to deal with that skill, and he wishes to conserve his team's fighting strength so that they can keep on going in the subsequent rounds. There'll always be another chance to take revenge. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.